Fellow Cameroonians, my dear compatriots, the year 2017, now drawing to an end, has been one of the most challenging our country and our people have experienced in decades. The rampant impoverishment of the overwhelming majority of Cameroonians is further compounded by a budgetary crisis that was foreseeable and by an unprecedented political crisis that henceforth involves the very survival of our country as a united nation rich in its cultural diversity inherited from colonization. In short, the Cameroonian nation finds itself in a critical situation at the eve of an electoral year that is crucial for its future. President Paul Biya inherited from its predecessor, Amadou Ahidjo, in November 1982, a peaceful, stable, and prosperous country in which, after bloody nationalist fights, we were henceforth looking forward to an overall development that could drive the improvement of population's standard of living. During the 35 years in power, Mr. Biya, the CPDM and its regime have, through their irresponsible and inconsequent management, destroyed the achievements of the past, starting from the national unity and the living together. They have transformed the country into a zone of chronic insecurity, assumed tribalism and ethnic hatred. President Biya and the CPDM have spent more than 3 decades spelling peace to Cameroonians, while they themselves have never been peace builders. They don't have anything to offer anymore now that they have plunged the country into civil war after having decided to wage a war that was not necessarily a Cameroon war against Boko Haram. It is now clear to each Cameroonian citizen it is neither the president nor his regime that can preserve the unity of this country and the national harmony. Like most of his statements, especially rigor and moralization, President Biya spoke of national integration without believing in it. More than ever, the country is divided and the defense of its territorial integrity saw the help of a neighboring country in the last few years. This nation could not be humiliated so much. A nation that was the dominant force of Central Africa is henceforth doomed to looking back on its past glory with nostalgia. Those responsible for this nation's drama are alive, and the Cameroonians people must neither forget nor accept that they hide behind the unacceptable formula "we are all responsible." Cameroon Renaissance Movement militants and sympathizers will forever be grateful for the sacrifices made by our brave defense forces and the courageous populations of the far north to make sure the Republic stands firm against the terrorists of the Boko Haram sects. It should be recalled that those sacrifices and suffering of soldiers and populations are the dramatic consequences of a serious political mistake made by the regime, which for 35 years has chosen to abandon to diverse predators entire parts of the national territory and the populations that live therein. In fact, busy as it was to protect itself against the people, Mr. Biya's regime forgot that the country has borders that needed to be protected. Preferring political corruption to far-sighted and responsible management of the northern part of the country, the regime placed all its bets on the elite that is indeed under its influence. This CPDM elite specialized in the fabrication of electoral results that are totally unrelated to local political realities. They use and abuse diverse forms of terror to subjugate the population of those parts of the country. With their support, President Biya has patiently and cynically built a breeding ground for insecurity that the Boko Haram terrorists have just been exploiting. To the brave populations of the northern part of the country, where famine threatens close to 3 million of our compatriots, and particularly the stricken population of the far north, to soldiers who, at the expenses of their lives, have so far preserved the integrity of the national territory against those barbarous and modern time, the CRM and myself extend our eternal gratitude, our solidarity, and our renewed encouragement. My dear compatriots, while the country was still after the Boko Haram terrorists in the far north, the Anglophone question dealt with in the CRM vision for Cameroon since its creation in 2012 has raucously forced its way into the national political agenda from October-November 2016. The denial of the government, followed by its arrogance, by the excessive use of force, judicial terror, mass punitive military operations with ensuing massacres of unarmed populations, have succeeded in transforming legitimate political and social grievances of the northwest and southwest population into revolt against the regime and finally into a civil war. I reiterate my absolute condemnation and that of the Cameroon Renaissance movement of any secession project in Cameroon. Likewise, I condemned violence in all its terms and all its forms, be it the violence by armed and security forces against unarmed populations, even if the latter will express political demands, or the violence by members of secessionist groups that either target soldiers fulfilling their mission of security and protection of the integrity of the national territory, or populations and leaders who reject extremism. At the CRM, we cannot help feeling that a political agenda is hidden behind the civil war that President Biya has succeeded in imposing on the Cameroonian people, notwithstanding the well-meant and patriotic advice that we gave him, both publicly and informally. Advice from many other national political actors, from friendly countries of Cameroon, and from diverse international organizations, especially the United Nations. In fact, any attentive observer is, to say the least, disturbed by the essentially warlike attitude of the President of the Republic and his government in a purely political matter which, on top of that, is in fact just the consequence of his willful and irresponsible refusal to implement regionalism inscribed in our Constitution of 18 January 1996. At a time when the National Army is already battling at the far north front with a grueling human, economic and financial cost for the country, when 6 of the 10 regions of the country are fiscally stricken, when Cameroon has gone back to the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and at the beginning of a 2018 long election year with important financial commitments, one wonders why the President of the Republic could tip the country into a civil war if it is not because he has chosen the politics of chaos in order to hold into power, or because he is no longer clear-minded to govern the country. The result is or will be the same in either case, a disaster for Cameroon. Whatever we will see in the near future as regards this illogical will of the regime to quell the flames of civil war in the two Anglophone regions of the country, the Cameroon Renaissance Movement once more reiterates its categorical stance against the shift in electoral calendar, no matter the reason. A wanted war provoked and fueled by the regime, which fears to defend its records of 35 years of unchallenged rule, coupled with its recurring mistakes against the people that is now ready to shake off the yoke of dictatorship, could not in any case be invoked to justify the total or partial postponement of the elections scheduled for 2018. That being said, no matter the numerous lives of soldiers and civilians needlessly sacrificed and the atrocious suffering imposed on the peaceful populations of Northwest and Southwest by excessive militarization and measures of administrative terror, it is still possible to save the peace. For this to happen, as we have continuously proposed to the government, it is imperative and urgent to organize in sincere national dialogue to thoroughly solve the Anglophone problem. At the same time, we need to look into political, institutional, and electoral reforms that are henceforth unavoidable, given the general situation of the country and the risk of generalized crisis that could emerge with the upcoming elections based on an electoral code conducive to massive fraud and change of results. This dialogue must preceded by some prior actions on the part of the regime. Release of persons detained and prosecuted under the Anglophone crisis. Return of the refugees, which reliable sources estimate to be in the thousands. An address by President Biya to our Anglophone compatriots in relation to the humiliation that have been unjustly imposed on them since November 2016. A visit of the President of the Republic in the two regions, during which he will, if only as a matter of form, discuss with Anglophone compatriots in English their grievances and their unhappiness, as they have, without discrimination, endured all sorts of insults, terrorists, dogs, bandits, etc., from important personalities of the regime. And those personalities have never been at least called to order. If he was not capable of conducting such a linguistic and political exercise, he will not only justify by himself the Anglophone demands, but he will disqualify himself from the presidential functions in a country where populations have just braved their usual fears to demand to live in full bilingualism as inscribed in the Constitution, and their double culture inherited from history. His recent speech, given entirely in French, to address the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, speaks volumes on his will to negate the colonial biculturalism. Nevertheless, we encourage him to undertake with respect to our Anglophone compatriots this responsible approach. It is admittedly incompatible with his political management based on arrogance, contempt, complacency towards those he nonetheless gets his legitimacy from. But in the critical situation he and his supporters have plundered the country, there is no other viable solution.